In this video, I'll be going over problem number 14 in exercise 1, 7.5. And problem 14 is a useful problem for us to go through because by going through this problem, you'll see two separate conditional proofs, one conditional proof after the other. So that's the key concept here to get down by going through 14. And hint, you just might see a problem like this on the next test. So let's begin by, of course, examining what we're given and what we're after. Usually, we're given a horseshoe statement as our conclusion. We're asked to derive a horseshoe statement. Not quite the case here in 14. At 14, we're looking for F triple bar H. So that's kind of nice, not too terribly difficult to work with, because we know we're going to have to finish up by doing material equivalence. The only real question we have, do we want two horseshoes joined by a dot, or do we want two dots joined by a wedge? So we've got to think about the two possibilities here for material equivalence. But given that we're to do conditional proof, and conditional proof centers around horseshoes, it seems to make sense that we're going to finish this problem off by having two horseshoes joined by a dot. So let's just make some notes out here in our margins to clarify exactly what it is that ultimately we'll be after. By doing material equivalence to this conclusion, we would really be looking for H horseshoe, or F horseshoe H, and H horseshoe F. Those two horseshoe statements joined by a dot. And since they're joined by a dot, we can again think of this as two separate objectives. Get the F horseshoe H on some line, get on some other line the H horseshoe F. We can finish up with conjunction, material equivalence, and we'll have ourselves the triple bar that we're ultimately after. So even though there isn't a horseshoe given to us immediately in the conclusion, once we work backwards, engage in some reverse engineering here, we can clearly see that we are, in fact, after two separate horseshoe statements. So there will be our two separate conditional proofs. We'll do one conditional proof in which we assume the antecedent here, the F, and then we'll be after the H. Once we discharge that, once we complete that conditional proof, we'll do the same sort of procedure here, by this time assuming the antecedent of our second horseshoe statement, the H, and that time we'll be after the F, discharge, join the two lines together via conjunction, material equivalence, and there's our triple bar. So that's my plan of attack, just looking at the info that we're given. Before I begin those two separate conditional proofs, however, I also notice here that I have to manipulate line number one. Line number one, the main operator, of course, is that triple bar. And again, the only way to deal with that triple bar is to do equiv. So I'll start 14 by doing material equivalence on line number one. And again, with equiv, just the nature of the beast here, I've got two options. I can have those two horseshoes, or I can have two dots joined by a wedge. And so which one is most likely? Well, again, given that we're working with conditional proof, and this generally is the easier option to deal with, it's probably going to be the case that I want to turn line number one into two horseshoes joined by a dot. Certainly, this is a little bit more complex case of material equivalence as compared to what we've seen earlier in the text. We'll have to introduce some brackets to this, making it again a little bit more complex, but the same basic pattern holds. So here's what it would look like. If we do material equivalence equiv to 1, we would get F and G. We'll just treat this essentially as though it's a single variable here grouped in parentheses. F and G horseshoe H, and the reverse of that, H horseshoe F and G. We need to introduce those brackets, clearly identifying the dot as the main operator, and that's the result. This should be, of course, line number 3. That's the result of one equiv. Let's continue to break down, to bust out line number 3 before we embark upon our conditional proofs. The main operator here is a dot, so let's go ahead and bust that up. The first conjunct by itself, F and G, horseshoe H, that's the result of 3 sim. And then let me combine on 3 a common ascent to get that second conjunct by itself, H, horseshoe, F, and G. So now that I've done some preliminary steps here to bust up line number 1, now I'm ready for my conditional proofs. So let me start with the first conjunct of ultimately what it is that I want to get here. Let me start, as discussed earlier, by assuming the F. So let me indent, take on that assumption, F, A, C, P. And now that I have F to work with, what I'm after is the H. But that F will allow me to do a modus ponens here with line number 2. So I can do 2 and 6 modus ponens for line number 7, and that will give me the G. I'm after the H. H appears at the tail end of line number 4. So to get that out, of course, here I'm going to have to do a modus ponens, pull off an MP. which means that I have to construct the antecedent to line number 4. But that's easy enough to do now that I have 6 and 7. 6 and 7 conjunction, and I'll have the antecedent to 4. That'll get me F and G. And now, easy enough, 4 and 8 and P for 9. And there's my H. So I'm ready to discharge and complete my first conditional proof. Unindent, join the first and the last lines together via a horseshoe, F, horseshoe, H. And that's 6 through, I've misnumbered here, no I haven't, 6 through 9 conditional proof. And I'm not quite done yet. Now I need to take on my second assumption to get my second conditional proof. This time I wanted to assume the H. So I'll indent again, second conditional proof, we finished one, we need another. So this time I'll assume the H, ACP, and I'll go ahead and let you finish off problem number 14. You'll this time be after the F. Once you get the F, you can discharge, completing your second conditional proof. And then again, as discussed when I was formulating my plan of attack, conjunction, equiv, and you'll have yourself the triple bar.